The beauty of filmmaking or most creative discipline is there are lines, but there are no glass walls, there are no walls. You can follow multiple disciplines within your vocation. Novelty is a factor. You need to tell a new story. Perspective is a big factor. Your treatment is a big factor. Local stories told with authenticity find global resonance. But how, as a filmmaker, you're able to make them understand the world, the conflict, the emotions is the craft of a filmmaker. And if you're able to successfully do that, people will resonate with the story. Creative tools, technological tools are going to get a massive upgrade. And if we embrace them and still realize, not feel threatened by them, that we still hold the final say on those elements, I think it's a tremendous time for being a creator.
Hello everyone, this is Design Darshan. I'm Gauri.
And I'm Sia, and today we're in conversation with Mr. Raghav Khanna. So, sir, to give our audience a background, can you share a bit about your journey from being a writer to a producer to a director, and how do you think has each role shaped your creative process?
The beauty of filmmaking or most creative discipline is there are lines, but there are no glass walls, there are no walls. You can follow multiple disciplines within your vocation. If you look at the trajectory of some of the masters of cinema, they've all been directors, actors, producers, writers. So very early, I was excited by this prospect that you don't need to define yourself as only a producer or only a director or a writer. I mean, there are people who've made illustrious careers by following one discipline, but this field and most other creative fields, like I said, do not restrict you. For most creators, for most filmmakers and storytellers, the joy lies in knowing as much as you can about your discipline and applying as much as you can. Cinema or filmmaking at large is not a particular discipline. It is an amalgamation of many art forms. So that's exciting for me. And I believe overall, being multidisciplinary has allowed me to have varied perspectives within my own discipline. From a very career professional point of view, and this is for everyone who's starting their journey, it somewhere increases your employability early on in your career as well. The lopside would be that you may not get categorized as a specialist, but if you excel and you are reasonably good at multiple disciplines, you are one of the most hireable candidates. To give you an example, we meet multiple people, and at least personally when I'm hiring, if people can possess speciality in one or two micro streams, but at the same time have an above average knowledge or application skills for others, that's a big green flag for hiring for me.
So, starting your journey years back, what led you to enter this particular creative space, and how do you think the industry has changed since then?
For me personally, very early on, I realized that I want to be telling stories for the rest of my life. This is something that I have learned from many successful people, and with all the students I talk to, I tell them the same. It may seem difficult at the start, but when it comes to choosing your profession, when it comes to deciding what you want to do for the rest of your life, only do what you really love, what you can't get tired of, what you'll do even if you don't get paid for it. Because this is going to be one of the longest engagements in your life. And obviously you can change your streams midway, there's no saying you can't. But if you stick to a career or a profession and you follow it for the rest of your life, ideally you should not be doing something you don't like. You should wake up almost all mornings with great enthusiasm to do what you're doing. So that's something I felt about storytelling. Now, how has this industry and what I'm doing changed is an interesting question, because I believe this generation right now is at that same cusp. When I was starting, the analog world was paving way for the digital world. There was no social media. Internet was just in a very nascent stage. When I was growing up, there was dial-up connection through landline phone. That's almost archaic right now. You'd probably find those in museums. Smartphones were not a thing. Wi-Fi was unheard of tech. Now, whatever I learned, whatever I studied, was not the world I entered. So my learning was continuous. For many people of my generation, the learning was continuous because no amount of academics taught you how the world is going to change because of technology over the next decade. We all adapted and improvised. I believe this generation is almost at that same point where why the digital world has settled all around and taken over our lives, but artificial intelligence and maybe the next generation of digital application in our life will change how the next decade will look like. So, being perceptive and receptive would be a great ally for all of you as you continue through your academic and professional journey.
All right. So coming back to storytelling, what is something about storytelling that really fascinates you that, initially got you here?
It is the power of stories. Stories are immortal. You look back at ancient civilizations, you look back at people, the most influential people in history. Our only way of engagement with them is through stories. Even if you look at historical textbooks, facts, after a point they're all stories. And for any storyteller, their success lies in, according to me, how longer can your stories live after you've left this world. We come from a land of great epics, and whether you believe in any religion or not, whether you subscribe to a particular faith or not, they are the cultural fabric of the society we grew up in. And that's not only true for our country, that's true for many countries elsewhere as well. If you look at the Western world as well, and interestingly, this is something I recollect, that we grew up in a land of Ramayana and Mahabharata. So those epics become the focal point of our cultural fabric. But in countries where there are Western epics or Greek epics or Roman epics they have to rely on, they may not be that culturally central to their upbringing, but that created space for a Lord of the Rings to emerge. That created space for a Harry Potter to emerge. People somewhere love taking refuge in stories. These stories could be epic in scale, or these stories could be your day-to-day routine realism-like stories as well. And storytelling is not only refined to a particular art form anymore, it never has been. But in my discipline, I make documentaries for a living. And documentary filmmaking poses such a unique challenge, and that's what excites you also, because you're working with real characters in real situation, telling a real story without altering it too much. But at the same time, the aesthetics, the cinematic experience, and the storytelling has to match anything that emerges from the world of fiction as well.
So as someone who bridges different creative worlds, what personal experiences have shaped your understanding of storytelling?
I think being open-minded and perceptive is one of the greatest strengths of any storyteller. What we do, we play with contradictions. You have to have a script. You have to have an idea. You have to have your characters locked. But at the same time, at every stage in the process of storytelling, in the process of filmmaking, you have to be open enough to adapt to change. Because creativity and storytelling is such a fluid and dynamic process. Sometimes it's to your advantage that what you conceived, envisioned on paper, you translate it exactly on screen. But sometimes it's also to your advantage that the nuanced changes, additions that you sense along the way, you bring them in your storytelling. The other thing that I value immensely is that filmmaking is teamwork. You may be a writer, you may be a painter or a designer, and you can work in isolation. But when you're out to make films, You need to have capabilities of working with a team, of managing your team, and also respecting their talents on board, because they all contribute to enhancing your vision.
That connects with what we're learning here at BITS. We believe in a transdisciplinary approach. So, documentaries involve learning about other fields, such as your work with Tiffin Stories or Raja Rasoi and Kitchen. So, how does that work? How do you work in a transdisciplinary field, and do you find significance in that?
That is the beauty of documentary filmmaking, because every subject you choose to make a film on or a series on, as a filmmaker, you embark on a learning curve. Early in my career, I made a documentary for one of the most reputed TV networks in the country and worldwide. And it was around the life of doctors and patients. It was set in the medical world. Now, for somebody who's not studied medicine at all, this was a tremendous learning curve, because suddenly I found myself filming in an operation theater a liver transplant. I found myself in an operation theater where a cardiologist is performing an open heart surgery on a child. Now, I have to do justice to what I'm filming, visually, narratively. And for me to reach that basic point, I need to have an incredible amount of understanding of the subject and the people in the world, the milieu in which they are. Similarly, for Raja Rasoi, we embarked on telling the food history of India through a cultural lens. In order to do that, this was something I realized you couldn't understand or learn over a short span of time. So, all my subconscious learning, all my observations in this country, from a social, cultural, religious standpoint, they all amalgamated, clubbed with the understanding and learning of food within this country. Food is not just something you eat to satiate your hunger or to satisfy your taste buds. It is a medium, it forges connections. It is an ambassador of cultures. And that is something we represented in Raja Rasoi or Ane Kahaniyan. That is also a facet of food in its deeply personal and emotional form that will come out in different stories.
So, knowing that you're working with different kinds of people in different fields, how do you often grasp onto the immense amount of knowledge that you get from it, and how are you open to all the numerous fields out there?
Over a period of time, there is corrosion. But what happens is, whenever you are making a documentary or a film, it is a 8-month to 2.5 year cycle, far ends of the spectrum. Within that time, you have to learn as much about your subject and their disciplines, thematically, factually, and also how you view it in your storytelling. I lay a lot of emphasis on preparation and development time, because you have to do proper research. There's no substitute for it. That research has to translate in writing. And only then, only when you reach a point where you're confident of your writing, should you begin filming. That's just a very basic rule of filmmaking.
Right. You mentioned you care about research a lot. What are the steps that you take personally to research about a project? Are there any particular methods that you have in mind?
Good question. Research methodology for multiple projects sometimes can be different. To give you an example, if I am making a film on events or subjects which have happened in the past and there is no live occurrence, we have the time to invest in traditional research, where the team, which will comprise of researchers, writers, producers, will read all the available literature and books around the subject. We will try and meet what we call subject experts, people who hold immense knowledge, frame our questions basis our reading, get them to talk to us and further enhance our knowledge. That roughly is a good start point for you to feel confident that, okay, now you are empowered and enabled to write a script or a structure of what you're doing. However, there's another kind of filmmaking where you're following live events These live events could be in the life of a particular individual. If your film is based around a personality, if it's around a subject, say, for instance, you're making a film, a series on Olympics. You can't defer the time the Olympics happen. You have to film on a during a very specific window. Your learning, your writing, and your filming will have to happen in tandem. And that sometimes comes with experience because it could get overwhelming. In terms of categorizing, there is an approach where A finishes followed by B, B finishes followed by C. But there are also times you have to be able to adapt so that A, B, and C can happen concurrently.
Interesting.
So going back to the different stories and Raja Rasoi, what is the reason behind your immense love for working on stories related to the food and kitchen?
At some point in my career, or maybe at some point in my life when I was deciding what I want to do for a living, being a chef was also a realistic option. And I realized that if I become a filmmaker, I can still cook. But if I become a chef, it's very difficult to make films. And obviously the love for films outweighed the love for food professionally. But I feel immensely blessed that I got a chance to work in food stream. What this industry does is if you do well in a certain genre, you continue getting work in that genre. That is a safe approach to excel in that particular genre, but unfortunately it also restricts you. So I have been mindful to work in the food space enough so that my love for food finds an outlet in storytelling, but also diversify my stories which are beyond food as well.
So in filmmaking and as in design, there's a need to connect emotionally with the audience. What can design fields borrow from this cinematic storytelling to enhance user experience?
What you hinted at, that emotional connection with your audience or your customer is at most important, and that is correct. Without naming films, I'll give you examples of films which have had the biggest star cast. Technically, they are executed to perfection, but somewhere they don't connect with you. However, an independently made film on a shoestring budget somewhere resonates with you. Somewhere the longevity of a film made 50, 60, 70 years ago, 20 years ago, still feels relatable when you watch it today. Whereas a big spectacle that came and probably you saw it in theaters, you can't watch it again. That is that point of emotional connection. I believe it's intangible, but somewhere the creator has to be honest to themselves. The designer has to be honest to themselves that what they're doing with utmost integrity. It's clear in their communication, it's clear in its approach. I think that's how you find emotional connection with the audience. Novelty is a factor. You need to tell a new story. Perspective is a big factor. Your treatment is a big factor. What do directors do? What do designers do? You could hand an idea or a concept to anybody, and everyone will have a different take. But it is your particular take and treatment on a product, on a story, on a project that defines you as a creator. And if your take, more often than not, finds resonance with audience, I think in any creative discipline, that is something you should hold dearly.
So continuing on the influence note, many designers draw inspiration from movies that they have watched. Have you noticed a two-way influence where cinematic projects are shaped by trends in design, architecture, or fashion?
Absolutely, and all the time. Cinema is influenced by the world, by our surroundings. You look at the great film by Master Stanley Kubrick, 2001: A Space Odyssey. Watch with minute details how the living room, how the chairs, how the costumes, how that world is created. We're talking of a time many years ago, but when you look back at that film, you realize a master at work, you realize a visionary at work, because those aesthetics are still applicable today. When you watch something like a historical period drama, say within our country, Lagan or Mughal-e-Azam, they are based in reality. The research that goes for costume, the research that goes for weaponry, for the social structures of that point in time characters. A lot of research goes into taking inspiration from the world around us. Similarly, films have had cultural influence in determining trends, be it in the world of design and fashion as well. Uh, I mean, very recently, one example that comes to my mind is of this film Barbie. You would have seen,
Yeah.
and it probably was linked to the marketing strategy as well. But you see how stores get flooded with that merchandise. That's something people start buying. Obviously, this was pre thought. They were designers at work, designing a lot of unrelated merchandise like a coffee flask, a school bag, and 10 other things around a movie that's about to release 10 months from that day.
Yeah.
Somewhere, if it finds a resonance with the audience and the customers, to your previous question, the products and the designs you created around a movie will outlive the film. I remember when I was growing up, one particular film, Dil Chahta Hai, some of you
Yeah.
have seen it. Stylistically, it redefined what filmmaking is. It redefined what storytelling is. Resonated with a whole range of young generation and still remains relevant today. So look at that film, see the power of design. One example would be Dil Chahta Hai from India, and another example which I cite is 8.5. Both these films are, I think, masterclass in terms of how design can influence life and how the films are itself design inspired by design.
So, how do you balance the artistic freedom that is there in visual design with some of the practical constraints that you may face in storytelling?
I won't call them constraints. When you work in any mainstream discipline, there are certain expectations of you. Those expectations are put in place by your peers, by the industry at large, because your output and your creation is aimed to cater to audience, to customers, and somewhere materialize profitability for the investors. You have to embrace this structure and create. I'm not saying that you can't adapt or change or you can't maximize your creative potential, but somewhere you have to steer away from an anarchic attitude. Mainstream creation, be it for cinema, be it for design, allows you a platform to reach as many people as possible. And as a storyteller, that should be your biggest aspiration, that your stories are reaching the widest set of audience as possible. Again, there is a contradiction. You always have to be true to what you're saying, what you're developing, what you're telling. You can't tell your stories from a place of pretense. You have to feel the stories you tell. But at the same time, you have to aspire to reach as many people as possible and hope that they all connect with your stories in some way.
So, as a producer and director, you worked on projects where design elements like set design, visuals, they contribute significantly to the story. How do you use design as a tool to communicate emotion or themes in a film?
I think, according to me, design and aesthetics are at the root of storytelling, especially visual storytelling, because it is so engaging in terms of your senses, the way music comes in, the way your characters are placed in front of the camera, camera movement, what they are wearing, the background in which they are, the way your set is lit, your choice of lensing. Each of these small and minute decisions cannot be by default, cannot be by chance. They all are carefully invested in. The color you're wearing will have an emotional impact on the audience and on the frame.
Absolutely.
The way the frame is lit, whether it is high key lighting, low key lighting, will convey a certain mood. The way I move my camera around the character will also create a sense of dynamism, a sense of movement. And learning all these, because all this knowledge is now consolidated and there's a lot of self-learning at play as well. Learning and interpreting how these small nuances, these other disciplines contribute to your overall sense of design and communication is important. For a filmmaker, that is the genesis, that is the core foundation of what you do. You have to understand and learn these theories, these principles which have been in place, but at the same time adapt them to your storytelling.
So, talking about setting up a movie and all, where do you think lies the difference between telling a story through a book and telling a story through a movie on a screen?
They both are two different mediums. When you're reading a book, what happens is the theater of the mind. Each of us are playing a different film in our head while reading that book. But when a screen adaptation happens, there's little left for inference. You can't decide the look of the character because I've presented that look to you. You can't decide how the story moves or the subtext because that's all planted in. So they both have existed for a long time as two separate mediums, often feeding into each other. And I think that trajectory will continue.
So, to lighten up, do you judge a book by its cover or a movie by its poster?
Absolutely, 100%. Because that lays the emphasis on the cover and the poster. I'm not saying that they'll outweigh the book or the film in its content, but to get people excited about what you're doing, to get people intrigued about what you're doing, the poster and the cover are critical. And I think that's where design comes into play.
And do you personally pay attention to this? And as a director, do you have a specific idea in mind for your posters?
Yes, and I think it depends on the films that you make, the series that you make. When you're working commercially, the great thing is that you leverage on the expertise of other professionals as well. So, designing a poster largely is a part of the marketing endeavor in any filmmaking or any kind of storyteller at large. Obviously, the director and the creators have a say, but you're working with people who specialize in that element. There's a designer, there's a marketing agency, and then there's the creative team, including the director. And it's almost a roundtable discussion through which the final products appear. And most of these conversations are enriching and rewarding.
So you say that you do have, like, directors and creative people do have a say in, how they want the look to be. So how do you ensure that the designs, they align with your vision?
Any film or any story that is catered for the screen has a genre, has a theme, has a mood. The creative communication, marketing communication, including the poster, cannot be against it. It has to align with that. So a few things are already taken care of, like the genre, the space you're in, your characters. And then certain marketing decisions come into play. You've cast the biggest actor in the country, you've cast the biggest actor in the world. We'd want to have them on the poster, right? If a film is only high concept, there are newcomers in it. You may want to create your poster differently because what you're looking at is not only communicating what the film is about, but getting people excited to switch in on their OTT app or go to a theater and watch it. That's why stars are so valuable, because their face on a poster brings box office. But that's where design is also equally important. I mean, if you study great film posters, some of them are just high concept design based posters. And both are different challenges for the creative team, including the director. Also, communication happens in multiple waves and across multiple territories. So, for instance, you don't need to only make one poster. You may be making 3 to 5 posters during the series, during a film's release. And whether, like I said, whether you're being carried by a big star, whether the subject has wider resonance, or whether your concept is novel and intriguing enough to pull in the audience, those are the multiple decisions that a large team takes collectively to arrive at design and communication for films.
Do you have a favorite poster or book cover?
One book cover that I really enjoyed is Clara and the Sun. Minimalistic but extremely effective in drawing readers to the book. Most of the books by Murakami are also fantastic with their design. When it comes to films, many posters come into my mind. I think Baby Driver is one. Then the original poster for Star Wars, definitely. Jaws. For me, one of the starkest images on a poster is seeing the poster of Jaws. Unfortunately, it was released much before even I was born. But I can only imagine how it would have been for people to watch this poster on a street and then be compelled to go to a theater and watch Jaws.
What is the significance of authorship in a storyteller's work?
I think it is utmost important. Authorship or your signature on your work is what lends you your distinct identity. When you look back at works of great masters of cinema, they will be very different from each other. They will always be making films about different subject. But one thing you'll be able to trace is commonalities in their motives, is commonalities in their treatment and storytelling. And say you take a director like Yash Chopra ji, or you take a director like Martin Scorsese, you'll see that they've had waves or periods of sustained commonality in their themes. And you look at their later work and you compare it to their early work, there may be a difference and a change in that. But you're able to study an author or a filmmaker's work, their life, through their authorship, through their signature.
So, as we're talking about authorship, how would you describe your style of authorship and how is it unique to you?
For me, I make documentary films. And what excites me the most while making a documentary film is finding real people in real setting with real stories. So there is a certain constraint in not being able to adapt or doctor those. But your expression is cinematic. Your expression is dramatic. I think that is the core of my design philosophy. That is the core of my aesthetics. A whole lot of filmmakers and authors may have influenced my work subtly or not so subtly. But you do pay attention to how you photograph your subjects. You do pay attention to the kind of music and background score you employ in your stories. And all those elements collectively influence your design.
So I don't think this podcast would be complete without mentioning The Elephant Whisperers. So it's a world-renowned film that gained recognition at the Oscars. Congratulations. However, it is made in a very specific context in Tamil Nadu. How do you see the context traveling around the world and people finding resonance with it?
I firmly believe local stories told with authenticity find global resonance, because we are not in a world where we are restricted to watch stories from around the world. Streaming has democratized your access to stories. Now, it presents immense opportunity for filmmakers and storytellers that you find a story rooted locally, in local sensibilities, local milieu. Their challenges may not be the challenges of somebody else, but how as a filmmaker you're able to make them understand the world, the conflict, the emotions is the craft of a filmmaker. And if you're able to successfully do that, people will resonate with the story.
Absolutely.
So, how do you see your work evolving to embrace rapid changes of the future, be it technology or be it any other macro features?
Personally, I'm somebody who encourages change, who encourages early adoption of technology. And the way we are, I think, whatever I'm understanding and reading about AI, we are going to create fantastic tools for ourselves. I don't think we are at a point where human ingenuity or human creative instincts are under a threat of being replaced. And that not only applies to a director, it also applies to a cinematographer and editor. It also applies to a writer. For a writer, you may be able to generate a paragraph through a prompt. But what that prompt is an additional skill a writer would need to have. You may be able to eliminate a lot of redundant, time-consuming, mechanical work in your editing and graphic design process. But the final aesthetics, the final output, the final ability to approve anything will still rest with humans. So I think we are just at an incredible point in time where creative tools, technological tools are going to get a massive upgrade. And if we embrace them and still realize, not feel threatened by them, that we still hold the final say on those elements, I think it's a tremendous time for being a creator.
So you mentioned earlier about 3D printing. How do you think such technology will affect your filmmaking process?
It will directly affect set design.
Okay.
Because right now we are working with fabricators, we are working with cast people. Your ability to design something and get it printed in a matter of hours or days at maximum reduces time and increases multiplicity. So that will be extremely rewarding for filmmakers, that you're able to design sets in a different way. 3D printing, I believe, is already in vogue in construction now.
Okay. Yeah.
So within filmmaking, it's going to soon replace traditional models of fabrication.
Okay, so to wrap this up, what advice would you like to give to aspiring designers who may want to enter this field?
Coming back to what I said earlier, that you are at the cusp of tremendous change. being open and receptive to that change and continuing your learning journey after your academic life is also extremely important. The world that's going to be in 5 to 7 years from now, nobody can predict. But you can see signs on the horizon on what skills will be employed. People who are not only well versed with softwares and technology, but who have a distinct creative treatment, distinct creative voice, are the people who will excel the most.
Great. Thank you for joining us. And that's a wrap.
Thank you.